What's up everybody, how's it going? It's Berk, aka Dansquate here, and welcome back to this playthrough of Final Fantasy X, in which I try to complete the game by using the attack command only. So far it's been one of the most fun challenges that I've done for Final Fantasy X, and you guys have continued to enjoy the series. And so in the last part we defeated a notoriously difficult boss in CityMorgue, and with that we head to one of the most interesting and epic sections of the game for any normal playthrough. And we're just going to have to see how I'm going to fare with these particular restrictions and see how I deal with the major bosses that are still to come. So we've got Sanctuary Keeper, we've got Spectral Keeper, and then we've got Unaleska in a pretty short space of time. So once I was done with Flux, it was time to head into the Mount Gagazet caves and continue this journey. So that's where we're going to pick things up. Thank you to everybody once again for the support for the series so far. It's been epic. And as always, if you are enjoying the content, please remember to drop a like, it really does help. And with that, we will resume the story and see how we fare on the road to Sanctuary Keeper, which is going to be the next major boss in the run. Now, the enemies that you encounter in the Gagazet cave area onwards, they are definitely a step up, and I thought there might be some of them that could cause problems, and with one in particular that I absolutely knew could be a potential roadblock in my ascent to the summit and my encounter with Sanctuary Keeper. So just as a quick reminder of the kind of stats that I have, Tidus has 67 strength, 40 agility and 33 defense, and he's had a few little luck boosts to kind of help him along the way. Yuna is starting to get there. I mean, her strength is very low, but her magic defense is 50, agility 43 as well, which are the two kind of most important stats at this point, along with her 3,500 HP. Kimahri is lagging a little bit behind Tidus. He's got 58 strength and 35 defense and 31 agility, but so far he's done a great job as a frontline member, and it's been great to continue to have him be kind of at the forefront and helping so much with this challenge, because he so often gets forgotten and not used in Final Fantasy runs. So that was a trio that I had, but heading into the Gagazet caves I wanted to bring Wakka back into the mix, because I knew there were some enemies that were potentially a little bit harder to hit, and I wanted to make sure Wakka was around for that so that we could take those out a bit more easily. In terms of the armors, there was at least one enemy that I knew could confuse me, so I made sure that I had a little bit of confusion protection once again, and other than that I was pretty much good to go, with confusion being the only worry that I had at this particular stage. And the first encounter we got was an ambush against a Mandragora, so this was going to be a good test, but very quickly once again it became clear that thanks to the likes of Evade Encounter and the absolutely massive damage that we were doing, even the Mandragora with its very high HP for a random encounter was largely going to be not a problem. So even though Kimahri got poisoned here, you can see there was pretty much no danger of the party dying here. So it already became pretty clear that, at least for enemies like that, we were going to be fine. That was already a pretty good sign. But the enemy that I was most wary of was still to come, and of course experienced players will already know which enemy I'm talking about, and we'll encounter one pretty soon. These guys were very easy, and once again they are an opportunity for Mega Phoenixes. They offer them as a rare drop, the bigger mechs. So if I ever did want to farm for some Mega Phoenixes, those guys were a way to do it as well, which was good. So I wanted to make sure I saved regularly, because we are at a more dangerous stage of the run at the moment. And so before long I encountered the enemy that I had been most curious of in this particular region, and I'm of course talking about the Dark Flan. Now, the Dark Flan is a big problem, because at the moment, yes, we have piercing weapons, which are really good for enemies that have the tough or like the armored status, but if they just have a straight up very high defense stat, then even with piercing weapons you're not able to do a lot of damage. So as you're seeing here, the guys, like, even though they have very good strength and they have piercing weapons, they're not really making that big a dent into the 12,000 HP that Dark Flan has. So this was already looking like a bit of a problem. But of course I just let the guys do their thing, and I was curious to see if I could kind of just still overpower it, even if it took a little bit longer than a normal encounter would. But as you can see, I mean, it's got some pretty powerful magic moves, and while my guys aren't very well equipped to kind of heal themselves at the moment, because I don't want to waste too much resources as well. And before long you can see the White Wind kicks in, and well, when White Wind heals 2000 and your guys are hitting for anywhere from like 200 to 600, you can already start to see that there's a little bit of a problem here. So before long, the first encounter I had against the Dark Flan actually ended with a game over, and it was the first game over I'd had from a random encounter in quite some time. So as expected, the Dark Flan did turn out to be a bit of a problem. So I was already kind of a little bit stuck here. I was thinking, well, what am I supposed to do? Because I don't want to kind of have to go down the let's just keep encountering things that aren't the Flan and get extremely OP in a very, very inefficient way, and then just have enough strength to completely brute force the guy, because I feel like that's a bit of a silly way to approach it. Now, normally what I would do in a playthrough, of course, is you can armor break the Dark Flan, which makes your life way easier, but that's not an option available to me in this particular challenge. And another thing that you do is to use Zombie. That's another way to do big damage against it and kill it very quickly. Now, this is the first time, I think, in the run where, kind of looking back on it, I realized that there was an easier way to get through, like a notably easier way to get through, that I didn't consider properly at the time, and Dark Flan was the first example of that. So Zombie is something that you can do, and it is a way to potentially do some really nice damage to the Dark Flan. So let's see what I ended up doing, and then we'll talk about kind of what would have worked better. So once I kind of got to reload the save, I started to have a look at what I could do against it. Now, Dark Flan is annoying because Stone Strike won't work, Death Strike won't work either, we have no armor break, as I said, has very high natural defense, and of course when you put the White Wind into the mix as well, it's just extremely difficult to overpower this guy unless you have those things available. So I was already thinking that I might end up being a little bit stuck here. I had a quick look at P. Birdman's Ultimate Companion Guide just to get a better look at what kind of stasis he's not immune to. There was only one that really stood out that I thought might be useful, and that was actually Silence. So I saw obviously from my first attempt that yes, of course, it's difficult and there's White Wind and that kind of thing, but I knew from the mechanics of White Wind that it doesn't trigger every time. And so there is a chance that if you just keep attacking and you wear the Dark Flan down enough, even when it uses White Wind, it's not going to recover that much because it's proportional to the amount of HP that the Dark Flan has left. So I thought if I could do that, silence it at the same time so it can't use its damaging spells like Flare, for example, then I thought I might be able to take it out. So I thought one of the few options that I had was to give someone like Tidus Silence Strike and see if with doing that I could afflict silence at a regular enough rate to at least stop the Dark Flan from damaging me, and then it just kind of turning into, can White Wind out heal the damage that I'm doing? So that was the kind of first approach that I had for it, and I started to see if I could set the guys up with that kind of setup. Now, I gave Walker a slow touch, but that's not going to work because of the resistance that Dark Flan has. You need something stronger to be able to afflict slow onto it. So I put it on there, but that was before I checked the mechanics properly, and so the slow touch is actually kind of useless here. So Tidus had a Mage Masher from a previous, I think, CityMorgue boss battle win. I think that's how we got it. And then alongside that, I just put Piercing on there anyway for some extra damage. And then I put his SOS Haste back on. So the plan became to kind of afflict Dark Flan repeatedly with Silence and try to wear it down and hope that White Wind wouldn't out-heal the damage that we were doing. And so with that, I kind of set back out to see how we did the second time around against the Dark Flan. In the meantime, we had a double Bashur encounter, which again wasn't a problem. Any of this kind of stuff is really quite easy at this point. This is where I would say Piercing kind of does come into its own, and in general it's a pretty invaluable weapon ability for this challenge. Yes, there are going to be cases like Dark Flan where even Piercing's not really going to be enough unless you're super powerful, but for a lot of encounters Piercing will make quite a big difference. So let's say for this particular area, the fact that you have Piercing just as a reminder of how it works versus Celestial Weapons, for example. Enemies can have a status which makes them armored, and this armored status reduces the damage they take by quite a significant factor regardless of what their strength status is, like a proportional reduction in the damage they take. But if you have a piercing weapon, then you are able to do the maximum damage that you can without the armored status taking effect. So then it just becomes like a straight up calculation between the enemy's defense and your strength stat. So that's great because if you have an enemy with, say, like the elements, for example, are a good example of enemies that have the armored status. If you have piercing, you're going to do a little bit more damage than if you didn't. Now, you don't do like normal damage because their defense stats are naturally high anyway, but it provides a nice benefit to proceedings. Now, the way that Celestial Weapons are special is because Celestial Weapons ignore the defense stat entirely. So it assumes that basically every enemy that you face has a defense stat of 0. And that's why the celestial weapons are so great, but as you've seen with piercing, you still do way less damage. So that's the general idea here, and you will see encounters in this particular area, like for example the Behemoth, which has a armored status, but actually has a pretty low defense stat. So it means that if you have piercing, then you can actually do really big damage to Behemoth. But against Dark Flan, it just doesn't work because the defense stat is so high. Like, it still helps, but it definitely doesn't allow you to do massive damage. So that's the general deal. And as you've seen for the water sections, you've got Tidus and Waka. Even though Riku is very low level compared to them, it's not really that much of a big deal because both of the guys have evading counter and they're very strong. So poor Riku gets bullied a little bit underwater, but it's not a big deal because Tidus and Waka can take care of business and keep us moving forward. And before long, it was time to face off against the Dark Flan for a second time. Now, the Dark Flan does have an 80% resistance towards being hit with Silence. That's why Silent Strike is definitely not working all the time. It will be roughly 1 in 5 attempts that Silent Strike will hit. So on the third go, Silence did hit, and I thought this gives me a better window to be able to do damage. Now, originally, I hadn't really looked everything up at this point, and so I thought maybe there's a small chance that if Dark Flan is silenced, it won't use White Wind. I kind of hoped that that might be the case, but as you can see, that didn't happen. And so I was already a little bit worried because I thought, yeah, okay, this is working well, and the characters are surviving here, but like with this White Wind, you're seeing like 1,900 healing, and I'm doing like about 1,200 with the 3 characters attacking. So you kind of have to get a little bit lucky here and wear him down long enough before the next White Wind is used. And with that, as you can see, so it went down to 1,100 there. And so with that, you just keep kind of chipping away, and eventually you will be able to wear it down enough to take it down. So it's not the most like elegant way to win. It is still pretty like brute force method, but it does work and you can get through. And so thankfully, I was very relieved that I beat my first Dark Flan and actually got through. So while I show you guys some more of the encounters, I'll explain what I should have done really to make the battle pretty much guaranteed and easier, and that is to have used Zombie. Now, I definitely have experience in using Zombie against Dark Flan, but in my mind, the way you use Zombie is you afflict an enemy with Zombie, then use the Phoenix Down to kill them immediately. That's generally like the way to use Zombie to defeat enemies. Now, in this one, because it's attack only, I kind of dismissed that idea, and I thought like, well, I can't use the Phoenix Down to kill it anyway, so I can't use Zombie. But obviously that's not quite correct, because yeah, okay, I can't kill it with a Phoenix Down, so I can't kill it in one move, but what will happen is that if I afflict it with Zombie, which it has no resistance to, I can get it to damage itself when it's using White Wind, and so as a result, all it's going to do when it does use White Wind is kill itself even faster. So that's what I could have done, and that's what I should have done, but at the time I didn't really think of it, and because I beat it using the Silent Strike weapon, I thought, what the hell, let's just keep rolling. And I didn't really think about any other alternative kind of ways in which I could have done it. But yeah, watching back and thinking back on it, that's definitely something I could have done to make the Dark Flan encounter easier. So Zombie Touch, and then allow it to keep hurting itself while it's trying to White Wind. That would have been the way to kill it more efficiently. So that's the general idea. That was the main enemy that was of any kind of significance here. Even the Mighty Behemoth wasn't that big of a deal, as you're seeing in the background here. Because of that piercing, the 27,000 HP that it has really isn't that much. I can kind of rip through it, and he doesn't really have many attacks that can hit everybody, and there's no Meteor spell upon death either, so I didn't have to think about that, and so I could kind of just go ham and kill it and continue to move on. And so with all of that, it didn't take too long for me to actually reach the top of Gagazet and my fight against Sanctuary Keeper. Now, Sanctuary Keeper was one I was potentially afraid of because it's one of the smartest designed bosses in the game. It has a lot of different variations in what it can do depending on what's going on in the battle. It's like a very reactive boss, and it has a pretty interesting set of mechanics. All I did know for now was that the first move that it does hits everybody, and it has a lot of negative, nasty statuses like Confusion and Sleep. So I put on some Confusion protection, and I wanted to just kind of get a feel for the battle, so I wanted to just get out there and give it a go and see how I was going to fare for attempt 1, and then sort of start to retroactively decide on what I need to protect against, what was worth sacrificing, what wasn't, and how I could go about defeating Sanctuary Keeper at the top of Gagazet. So for the first attempt I was more interested in trying to brute force it, so I didn't bring Yuna out here to kind of Phoenix down anybody. And immediately you can see the damage is a bit less because he does have a higher defense stat than Seymour Flux. So in comes Photon Wings, and look out for the statuses here. They are nasty. Yeah, so you've got Sleep, Darkness, Silence, and you can also be hit with Confusion as well on that one. So it's just really, really nasty. Two of my guys being asleep didn't help, but thankfully he woke Kimari up. But because of that darkness, you're seeing 2 attack opportunities were lost. He wakes everybody up again here with the tail sweep. And I mean, Waka doing 1,400 didn't look very promising to me either. But it was kind of like we were staying alive for a decent number of turns here. But darkness, you can already see, was proving to be quite a problem here. And so once tail sweep came again, Kimari was KO'd, and it was already looking like it's probably the end of the road here, because Mana Breath followed soon after, 3,680 damage, and Titus was left on his own here. But you can see with SOS Haste, he goes on a little bit of a run here. Now the Curaga is really nice, and quad 9 healing, but Titus is almost going 2 for 1 in terms of turns with Sanctuary Keeper, and he's doing 4,100 damage each time, and on a critical doing over 8,000. So this turned into like a fun little battle between these two at the end of this attempt. He put in like a really good effort here, and he even managed to dodge this tail sweep. So he gave it his all here, but unfortunately it wasn't quite enough because the next Photon Wings came in, and that's completely unavoidable. So he took the damage, and thus attempt 1 ended. So it was kind of a mixed bag because I was seeing like a ton of damage output from Titus, which was really promising. But I was thinking, like, is this going to be enough? It's using Curaga to heal for quad 9. I've got Darkness status. I got lucky last time and no one got confused. So I was thinking maybe I need to kind of have another think about this and see if there's a better way to kind of tackle it. So I had a look at my equipment once again. Second time around, I decided to try and take a little bit of a chance with Confusion, and I went to protect more against Sleep and against Darkness because I felt like they might potentially be a bigger problem. So for Waka, we had something that has Sleep and Silence protection on it too. So I was starting to kind of decide, it was literally picking your poison basically, because there were a lot of statuses that could cause problems, and I decided to kind of see if I could pick my poison correctly and kind of take some of the statuses and proceed with them and end up doing the damage I needed to win. Because the only Achilles heel I would say that Sanctuary Keeper has is that relative to where he is in the game and what he can do, he has very low HP. He only has 40,000 maximum HP, so it's almost half of Flux's HP. And you could say yes, it can use Curaga on itself, that's why. But still, in my eyes, it's pretty damn low, and that's the one chance we have to kind of really do some significant damage and take it out before it gets too much of a foothold in the battle. So you're seeing attempt 2 at the moment, and again, a lot of it kind of hinges on what happens after Photon Wings. So let's see how it went this time around. And Titus fell asleep, Waka got confused, and Kimari was fine this time. So it really is a mixed bag. You don't really know what you're going to get, and so you do need a little bit of RNG to get things working properly in this battle. So I wanted to have a good RNG run as well, where we didn't have like everybody asleep or confused, because it's definitely possible, and I want to kind of find out how much damage you can do if that ends up happening. So Titus back into SOS HP, but 2 of his hits were wasted there because of Darkness, but he comes back in for the 3rd. And you can just see, I mean, even though the battle doesn't look too great, the damage is actually piling up pretty quickly still as a result, and we're getting some critical hits here and there as well. So yeah, I mean, it definitely felt like this was very much doable, but I kind of had to decide if I really wanted to like go to another level of stats or anything like that. But as you can see, I didn't really have to do too much here, because that low HP just really was the Achilles heel here. And before long, Titus was able to defeat Sanctuary Keeper, and with that I was already pretty much done. So Sanctuary Keeper ended up being a bit anticlimactic. If it had, like I say, if it had like Seymour Flux's HP, or maybe even taken up to about 90,000, like 80, 90,000, then it would have been a truly like tough battle, because then those mechanics would have come in where it could have used Protect, could have used Curaga, that kind of stuff. But because of such low HP, there just wasn't much time for Sanctuary Keeper to really do anything. So once the RNG went my way, I was able to get past Sanctuary Keeper without too much trouble. So I thought to myself, I'm kind of a little bit ahead of schedule at this stage. I really thought Sanctuary Keeper might have taken a bit longer. And so with that, I was thinking ahead and thinking, well, I might have a bit of a situation where I could need a second Auto Phoenix character. And well, I knew that there was a bunch of lucrative things I could pick up against the enemies here. So like, for example, this first behemoth that I was fighting, this guy can drop really nice armors that have SOS Protect, SOS Shell, or SOS Reflect on them, and it could be up to 4 slots. So I thought, well, that's one thing I can get along the way. And I can also pick up some more Mega Phoenixes as a rare drop from the large mechs that appear as well. So, I mean, I'm only 12 hours and 46 minutes in here, and I'd already made it to Zanarkand challenge without going too insane on the over-leveling here. So I was very much like happy with the progress I was making. And so I thought to myself, you know what, I might as well take a little bit of time here to pick up some more stuff, get some more Mega Phoenixes, have a second Auto Phoenix armor potentially, and try and get some sweet armors as well. And well, I knew for the battles ahead that Yuna is going to be needed eventually, so I thought maybe getting Yuna and Auron as well in the mix to help them with their levels a little bit might be good as well. So this was like a little bit of a detour here, again on times 4 speed as well. It didn't end up being like a particularly long grind or anything, but it was quite lucrative, and so I'll skip ahead to like the end of this phase, and I'll show you what I had by the end of it. Now, in hindsight, I could have done a lot of this in the Zanarkand ruins. It could have been even better, but here I was also liking the potential armors that I could get from Behemoth, and that's why I decided to do it in the Gagazet ruins, because if you're seeking Mega Phoenixes, Zanarkand ruins is actually a better area to get them. Well, the Zanarkand Dome to be specific. But for now, I mean, I was getting everything that I needed here. Levels, Mega Phoenixes, plus core armors, and so I stuck around until I had at least enough Mega Phoenixes for the Auto Phoenix. The final reason I wanted to stick around here instead of the Zanarkand Dome was because this one had the Airyman enemy, and that guy can drop some Confusion Protection. Now, once again, thinking ahead, Confusion Protection is one of the harder ones to get, and well, up until this point, Tidus hasn't had a single Confuse Ward armor in the entire run. And so I know ahead that Yunalesca has the Mind Blast attack, which can cause confusion, so I was thinking maybe also while I'm around here kind of generally trying to pick up some more resources, I might be able to get some kind of Confuse Ward as well for Tidus. Now, unfortunately that didn't happen, but I wasn't going to stick around like any longer just for that one. So eventually, I would say after maybe about 45 minutes or so, I decided to move on. 45 minutes at times 4, so it was closer to about 3 hours of actual like game times worth, but it was about 45 minutes of my time, and on the game clock, of course, it was only 45 minutes that had gone by, but I'd squeezed like 3 hours worth of grind into 45 minutes basically. And so with that, I was ready to proceed and head towards the Zanarkand Dome to see what was going to await there as I entered my favourite part of the game. Now, as much as I would have loved to have spent a lot of time here so we can enjoy like the background music and all of that kind of stuff, the enemies that we face here are the same ones that we face in the cave. So there isn't really that much to say about the Zanarkand Ruins area, unfortunately. Always looks beautiful and is a great part of the game. It's like my favourite. Basically everything from like Seymour Flux up to Yunalesca is probably like, for me, it's like the peak of the game. That's where I enjoy it the most. Just some really epic moments, epic music, epic visuals, epic quotes, very emotional moments, iconic boss battles. Like it's just a great part of the game. It really is. So yeah, I would have loved to have spent some more in-depth time here, but it really isn't going to be worth it because we already know what happens against the enemies that I face here. And the goal is to keep these videos dense and compact and with momentum. Of course, the Zanarkand Dome is an area that is once again pretty well known for being one of the best areas of the game to level up. Aside from using like AP tricks and very kind of specific methods, in terms of just generally exploring around an area and just getting into repeated encounters to get lots of AP points, the Zanarkand Dome is one of the best places for generally like medium to low level characters in the game. So of course we're not talking about like trying to stat max here, but while you're here in the storyline, if you do spend an extra hour or two here, you can become very OP very quickly. It's just one of those kind of places. So I headed into the Zanakan Dome, and by this point, Walker had really started to break into more portions of the grid, and was starting to catch up Tidus and Kimahri as well with his stats. So once in the dome, I swapped out Kimahri for Walker because we have the longer range enemies, and Walker is the only one that can hit them. In general, as you can see, again, the guys here, not much of a challenge. Thankfully, I still had the stats and the preparations at this point. Evade Encounter, of course, is king here, because if there are any attacks to avoid, Evade Encounter will generally take care of those. There are some that's unavoidable, like if you face a Defender Z, you will get hit with Haymaker. Evade Encounter won't help. And if you are against those cannon guys, if they do the attack that hits the entire party, once again, it's not a physical like damage attack with a accuracy stat, so your evade encounter again will not work against it. But in general, especially thanks to having piercing weapons as well, it does make Defender Z much easier as well, because he doesn't actually have that higher defense stat. He relies more on that armored status to reduce the amount of damage that you do against it. So with the piercing weapons, you can make light work of it as well. So before long, it was time to face off against Spectral Keeper. And at this stage, because even against the likes of Dark Flan or Defender Z and all those guys, I'd figured everything out, and Sanctuary Keeper had fallen pretty easily. I was pretty sure that Spectral Keeper would follow soon after, and I was ready to fight against one of the game's more forgotten bosses in the run to Unalesca. Once I reached the end of the Zanakan Dome and it was time for the Cloister of Trials, because I knew I was basically safe at this point, once again I rotated in someone like Auron to help him benefit from the extra AP. And so I did do like a mini grind with Auron in the party as well, just to get him a few of those extra AP points and boost him along a little bit more, because again, I'd forgotten if you had a forced party against Unalesca or against Spectral Keeper. And well, if that happened, I was going to have to kind of go back and level up Auron if he was a forced party member in the battle anyway. So I thought I might as well just work on him now, because I knew for a fact that against Brass's Final Aeon, you do have to use Auron. And so there was going to come a time, regardless, when Auron would have to enter the fray and have his say in this challenge. And so this was another occasion where I did give Auron a little bit more time to level up. And I could pick up some more Mega Phoenixes again from the floating cannon guys as well. And so before long, I was ready to fight Spectral Keeper for the first time. I wanted to set myself up in a way that obviously would try to make me as tanky as possible and be able to heal as much as possible. You can see in terms of stats, I have gone up like another notch here with Waka above 5,000 HP. Tidus still on 4,300 and Kimahri on 4,400. But they've got sphere levels to cash in if it's necessary. So I just wanted to try it with the stats that I had for now to see what I could do. So I kept Tidus with his SOS Haste. For Waka, I had an auto potion armor. So I wanted to use that one, which I picked up ages ago in Beaconel. I thought that might be a good way to keep him alive. And he does have a beefy 5,200 HP now. And with Kimahri, I actually made a funny mistake again, looking back on it. It's so instinctive to have Berserk Ward in a normal playthrough against Spectral Keeper. But in this playthrough, it literally benefits you because your character is just mindlessly using the attack function anyway. And so if your character's Berserked, it's still going to do exactly the same thing, except do more damage. So yeah, it didn't end up becoming that important in terms of like the battle, but looking back on it, you don't need to protect against Berserk status in this one unless you have a character who has something like Auto Potion, because if they have Berserk status, they won't use Auto Potion and then still attack under the status at the same time. So that was one thing to look out for, but for this first attempt, Kimahri definitely didn't need any Berserk protection. So let's see how this first attempt went against Spectral Keeper. My mind was already so fixated on Unalesca that I kind of thought like, yeah, this guy should be fine. And I didn't give Spectral Keeper the respect that it deserves, because when you attack Spectral Keeper, it does the massive counter-attack Claw Swipe, which, as you can see, does immense damage, 2,200 kind of range to everybody. And so within 2 counter-attacks, my party was already almost dead. Waka threw his high potion, which only healed for 1,000, of course. And so within 3 attacks, my entire party got completely wiped out. So Spectral Keeper was a completely different proposition to Sanctuary Keeper because of that huge counter-attack. So once again, in this challenge, because of the restrictions that you have in place, the way that you face Spectral Keeper looks completely different to any normal run. Any part of facing Spectral Keeper, if you can play under normal circumstances, would be to move your characters around the different platforms in order to avoid the counterattack damage. With this one, we of course can't do that, so we have to face the full force of the Spectral Keeper counterattack. And this had me shook, like seeing the amount of damage that you take from that counterattack and knowing that I'd have to probably hit it like at least 10 to 12 times in order to kill it. I thought, well, that's like 22,000 damage. How am I supposed to deal with the damage that I'm taking from this particular boss? So Spectral Keeper threw me for a loop, and while I was already kind of thinking ahead to Unalesca, I had to pump the brakes and go back to the drawing board against Spectral Keeper to be able to beat it. This time around, the first thing I did was to add Auto Phoenix to Wakka's Auto Potion Armor. I felt like, of course, this is a battle where you're going to die so often as a result of those counterattacks. Having someone with an Auto Phoenix is probably going to be a good idea. So I gave Wakka the Auto Phoenix, and I thought, again, I'm sure that Auto Potion will be somewhat useful, and then Auto Phoenix plus the Auto Potion might be a good way to keep me alive for longer in the battle. For the next attempt, I decided to go with Wakka, Yuna, and Tidus. So I went with full Auto Phoenix protection to see how much difference that would make. And for Tidus, I gave him an SOS Protect armor that I'd got from the Behemoth in the previous area. So that was the setup that I went for, definitely tankier. Tidus with the Protect, and I had 2 Auto Phoenixes in there as well. And I wanted to see if I could stay alive for longer and do more damage to Spectral Keeper before those counterattacks completely wiped me out. So here we go then with attempt number 2, and straight away you notice an important problem. In a battle where the boss counterattacks you when you attack it, having a character like Yuna that only does 400 damage and then forces us to be counterattacked is very dangerous and very inefficient. So even though Tidus gets a nice critical here, I mean, in no time we've basically been wiped out, and this whole thing is definitely not working. So I'm going to take a little break here from the battle to talk about what you've just seen, because it's something that, again, a lot of players wouldn't have come across before. And even for me, when it first happened, I completely forgot why it happened or what the rules were. So actually, this is kind of like a voiceover of a voiceover, where during the actual main voiceover session, I didn't remember the exact way in which this happens. And so once the main session was done, I had to go back and kind of research how this worked to remind myself of it. And it's basically the idea that what you would have seen in general is that when you have Auto Phoenix, if one character has enough Phoenix Downs for it, they should be reviving the other 2 party members if they get wiped out. But in some scenarios, instead of reviving 2, they only revive 1. Now, initially, I thought, wait, is this because he used the potion first? And for whatever reason, he has 2 slots, and the Auto Potion takes up 1 of them, and so he can't use both, but it's definitely not that. So I kind of had to go back and relearn how this works. Now, hopefully you guys would have already seen in some of the content I've made before that there is a priority rank order for which of your characters uses the Auto Phoenix for any given situation. So that scenario I've actually covered, but what I haven't covered is what happens if 2 of the party members die and the 3rd one has Auto Phoenix. It's not as simple as just the only one standing using 2 Phoenix Downs. Sometimes in some situations they only use 1. So there is a priority order that the game uses to decide what happens in certain situations. This priority order is Tidus, Yuna, Auron, Kimahri, Wakka, Lulu, and Riku. The way that Auto Phoenix works is if the only character left standing is of a lower priority than both of the remaining characters, then it means that they won't be able to revive both of them. So in this particular scenario, because Wakka is the final one standing and his priority is lower than both Tidus and Yuna's, it means that he's not going to be using Auto Phoenix on both of them. Now, if this scenario happened in a way where Tidus and Wakka died and it was only Yuna left, then Yuna would be using the Auto Phoenix on both of them, because she would automatically use it on Tidus because she is the 2nd highest priority after Tidus, who has been KO'd. But then because Wakka is of a lower priority than Yuna herself, she will use the 2nd on Wakka. So it's a pretty niche kind of scenario that you're not going to see happening too often, and that's why it's barely ever been mentioned or seen, if at all, on this channel. But in this particular scenario, that's what happened. So if you're wondering why only 1 Phoenix Down was used, that's the potential case. So you have to know this particular priority order, and from that you can kind of determine the scenarios in which you will only have 1 Phoenix Down getting used. So I don't want to get too deep into the mechanics here so that it doesn't end up dragging things out and getting confusing, but basically that is the reason why this has happened. And if it hit Yuna instead, it wouldn't have happened due to these kind of priority mechanics. If your last standing character has a lower priority than the 2 that got KO'd, you will only see 1 Phoenix down being used in that scenario. So I wanted to make sure that was kind of clear before continuing. And so in pretty much no time at all, we got wiped out for the second time. And this was starting to look really concerning at this stage because I just simply didn't have the stats or the ability to keep up with all of these devastating counterattacks. So once again, after attempt 2, that was even worse than my first attempt, and I had to rethink what I was doing. With stuff like this, of course, I make sure I have a save before I commit to doing anything major. So like, let's say I've saved up 20 Mega Phoenixes, I don't use them until I have a save right before it in case I want to experiment with different setups. So the first thing that these attempts taught me was that I do need my HP to be high enough that once I get revived from Auto Phoenix, I can actually survive another counterattack. Because if you're coming back with 2000, then it's not really going to work because you're going to get immediately taken out on the next turn before you've been able to do anything. So it seemed to me like there was pretty much a minimum threshold that you needed to be at. You needed to have some combination of enough HP and or defense to be able to survive once you've been revived by a Phoenix down. So you're seeing again in this battle, alchemy would have made a big difference as well. If only I could customize alchemy as much as I wanted, Walker could revive people with maximum HP and he could heal himself for 2000 instead of 1000. So again, you're seeing why alchemy is such a big deal in these kinds of battles. So I took Tidus up another notch so that he could definitely survive a hit after he was revived, and I just wanted to test that out and see how it was going to work when I had a character that I definitely knew could do that. So without much further ado, I wasn't expecting to win, but I wanted to just go back in and just see what it was going to look like when Tidus had more HP. But it was already very concerning that Yuna was having the first attack and doing so little damage, because every time you face a counterattack, you want to have done a lot of damage before it to actually make the hit worth it. So Yuna here, yes, she's got the Auto Phoenix, but it seemed pretty obvious to me that she was a liability in the battle, because she was just forcing us to take these massive hits without really dealing any damage herself. Now it's time for another little interruption here, because this was another mechanic that I had to double check before I actually gave the information for. You will notice that we have evade encounter, but for some reason sometimes the sort of dodging activates and sometimes it doesn't when the claw swipe comes in. Now the way evade encounter works is that if you have it equipped, you will evade every single attack which is evadable. And so the key part of that is of course which is evadable. Now what you're seeing here against Spectral Keeper is that because this swiping attack is a counter attack, you can't counter a counter, otherwise you'll be in this like endless loop of countering each other, and so the game won't let you evade and counter this particular swipe. So what happens in this scenario is that you attack Spectral Keeper counters back, but your characters will not be able to evade that attack using the weapon ability itself. So then if you're asking, well, why do you actually get the chance to evade it at all? The game kind of treats it as if you don't have evade and counter equipped at all. So it looks purely at your evasion and your luck stat. So it means that if you're sufficiently powerful, if your evasion and or luck is high enough, then you can still evade this attack every single time anyway, but it won't have anything to do with the fact that you have evade and counter equipped on your weapon. So I just wanted to clear that up again for people wondering like what the evasion mechanics are like for this battle and for the counter attack. And so that's why in the previous attempt you saw things kind of went wrong there, because Yuna ended up evading an attack, and as a result they all kind of fell into this really awkward sync where the counter attack would kill everybody on the front line. So it was proving to be a bit difficult to track because you just can't really tell when that counter attack is going to be evaded and when it's not. So I needed a little bit more testing, so I was kind of diving back in there with kind of different characters and different setups to see how things were looking. But ultimately these early attempts were not going very well, and I could tell that I was in trouble, and it seemed almost impossible to beat him with the setup that I had. And so in this attempt I definitely did do more damage, but you can just see that Walker healing is just not enough to keep him alive. That 1000 from Auto Potion just not good enough. So Walker's going to need a bit more HP and defense as well if he wants to survive. And so things were really not looking good in these early attempts. I was definitely getting wiped out badly by that counter attack. In the next attempt, since Tidus already had an SOS Protect with a lot of free slots, I decided to give him the Auto Phoenix instead, and so I went out with Tidus, Kimahri and Auron this time. But once again, you can see that if you don't have the HP and the defense, after you get revived it just doesn't work. So Tidus survives this, and this is pretty much exactly as planned. He revives his two teammates, but they just don't get revived with enough HP to deal with the situation. So, I mean, it just wasn't really looking good, and I was getting totally outgunned. At this point, I decided to have a deeper look into auto potions, because I saw that I did have some SOS Protect armors, and with those, the damage that I was taking was going down to about 1200, 1100 kind of range. So I thought there, if I have an auto potion that's healing me for 1000, I might be able to kind of keep up with the damage that was being dealt once I was in SOS HP. So I decided to backtrack all the way to the sunken cave and try to utilize the previous thing that I mentioned about farming the magic urns for stamina tablets. So that was the general goal. I decided to go back and see if I could get more stamina tablets to potentially customize some more auto potion armors to try and help deal with the immense damage from the counterattacks of Spectral Keeper. You do get a half decent amount of AP there, so once again I decided to have like Yuna helping out just to get her some more AP points. But frustratingly, I thought that there was a pretty decent chance of getting enough stamina tablets for the auto potion, but I was having some pretty rotten luck, and so honestly I didn't end up spending that much time down here, and before long I just decided to head back because I really wasn't finding what I was after. So honestly it wasn't worth talking too much about that detour. I'll talk about when I returned and the setup that I tried for my next attempt. As you can see, the game clock has run to over 15 hours now, so it has taken me a little while here to try to kind of get the preparation that I wanted for this particular section of the game. So once again, Tidus' SOS Protect armor, I added Auto Phoenix to that one. I still felt like that was a strong combination, and if I really did need a different type of Auto Phoenix armor, it's something that I could do later on, because I could still farm for the Mega Phoenixes in this particular area. So once again, decided to go with Tidus and Yuna, have a double Auto Phoenix setup, and I wanted to try to kind of keep people alive. Now, the one thing that I decided to sacrifice for this battle was to use X potions instead of high potions for healing. Now, it was an area that I was a little bit kind of contentious about, because it turns out that getting X potions in this challenge is almost impossible. Because thinking ahead to like the really difficult challenges, let's say I made it through towards like the Monster Arena or even the Dark Aeons, I would have loved to have had like some auto potion armors that used X potions for the battle, because they're the only way to really heal for quad 9 HP in this challenge. Because obviously even with alchemy, auto potion with high potion will only do a maximum of 2000. You have no access to healing waters. SOS regen is obviously never going to heal 9999 HP in one turn, and so I really did feel like X potions could be very, very important. Now the trouble is that the only way in this particular challenge, based on all the research I've done, to get X potions regularly is to do Blitzball leagues, and it's a top scorer prize in a Blitzball league. So imagine you can get one or two, let's say you have two players in your Blitzball team that you kind of make them both finish top of the kind of scoring list, you can get 2 per Blitzball league. So it's not feasible in this challenge to farm like 99 X potions for a Dark Aeon boss battle or a really difficult boss battle of some kind. So that's why I thought eventually, you know what, I do have 25 X potions. If I can get away with not using that many of them, I feel like this boss battle is one where it's worth sacrificing it. And so I deliberately got rid of my high potions so that if anyone did get hit, X potion would be used instead, and my characters could retain their maximum HP. So it felt like that was a necessary sacrifice, because once again it was either that or spend more time farming here and say get to 7,000-8,000 HP and up my defense by another 10-15 points so that I could just tank it a lot more easily than before. And I thought, you know what, it's probably a better idea just to sacrifice some X potions to be able to get through instead. So that was the next strategy. I had Tidus, Yuna and Waka, and I had my double Auto Phoenix and my Auto Potion set up as well. So let's see if that was enough to take out Spectral Keeper. Unfortunately, again with this setup we have to open up with Yuna, but I didn't want to go through the process of farming for 20 more Mega Phoenixes to get a different character to have an Auto Phoenix, so I basically just took the hits and wanted to see what would happen regardless. So first X potion comes in there, and that makes him obviously safe from being KO'd from the next counter attack. Yuna gets KO'd, and so does Tidus here. So this was one of those where there was kind of a bad synchronization as a result of the times in which they evaded the attack. But what you're about to see here is the usefulness of X potion, and it's also the first time I actually made it far enough to see Glyph Mine. So this was another factor that I didn't even consider. I was so fixated on making sure I survive and do enough damage that I forgot that this guy uses Glyph Mines, and well, you're about to see why Glyph Mines turn this into a bit of a problem as well. Because yes, of course, you can't move away from them in this challenge, and so if you're unlucky enough for a Glyph Mine to appear underneath you, it means certain death. But this one felt like a bit of an unlucky attempt, so I wanted to kind of immediately jump back in and see what would happen this time around, because Waka was doing a much better job of surviving with the X potion, and I felt like this was probably still the way forward and how I was going to beat this guy in this challenge. At this point I was juggling through a lot of different saves because I was trying different kind of setups and equipment and using Auto Phoenix and this kind of stuff. So there is going to be like maybe some attempts are going to feature slightly different stats than others, and that's because I'm kind of jumping across different game files while I'm trying different things out. But in general, I wanted to just, as I've been saying, make sure I have enough HP to survive against that counterattack after I've been revived. So I'll show you guys the stats that I had. So again, not ideal, and I could spend a bit more time with Yuna, getting her some more sphere levels. I probably should have got her some more at this point, but I wanted to see if this would be enough. This is a little bit lower than some of the other ones you've been seeing, but I wanted to see if that would be enough, so I dived in for attempt number 2 to see how it went this time. And I wanted to see if I could avoid that annoying situation where both of my Auto Phoenixes got taken out by the same counterattack, which was definitely frustrating in the previous one. So in this next attempt, again, there's just some weird like RNG and unpredictable things that are going to affect the battle. So we kick things off once again with Yuna having the first attack here, and the counterattack coming in, and this time around it does hit everybody. So once again, I was looking to see what was going to happen with this second one. This was the key one. Yuna dodges this one, and this was a problem now because if on the next counterattack everybody got hit, then I'd have the same problem as last time. But this time around Tidus actually dodges it, and this was perfect because he can now revive Yuna and we can keep rolling. But you're going to see what happens very soon, and well, the problem is going to be pretty obvious here. The counterattack comes in, and Yuna didn't have the HP in this particular situation to continue on. So at this stage, this attempt was pretty much a raw kind of indication that Yuna just wasn't strong enough. I think the strategy was there, and the X potion plus having 2 Auto Phoenixes was going to be enough to get this done, but Yuna just wasn't strong enough to deal with the counterattack after she had been revived. So with this attempt, I was definitely starting to feel like I was getting much closer to figuring this whole thing out, and the X potion sacrifice was definitely looking like it was worth it. So the Glyph Mines go off, and Waka survives them both, and at this stage I was like, could he possibly end up soloing this battle? Like, is that possible? Because I've got the X potions as well, I thought maybe if he gets lucky, he can actually solo this. So the attack comes in, Waka's got somewhere around 20 to 22 X potions, so he's got enough of them to take him out. But the Berserk Tail comes in, and this time Waka gets berserked. Now, this is what I was talking about previously, where it doesn't really matter if you get berserked, and it can be beneficial because you do more damage, but as you're going to see here, the problem is that Auto Potion doesn't kick in when you've been berserked. So unfortunately, it still wasn't enough to take out Spectral Keeper, and to be honest, we weren't really that close, but I did know that if I could survive, if I could tank a little bit better against it, I was getting close. I knew that Yuna would need a lot more HP to be able to survive, and in fact it was so much that I thought maybe it's not worth it because it's going to take quite a long time to get her around the sphere grid far enough, because she took about 2,600 to 2,700 damage from each counterattack. So she needed about 5,400 to 5,500 to guarantee that she would survive when she was revived. And I thought, you know what? Kimahri and Waka naturally have higher defense than she does. Maybe it's just better to cash in some of these sphere levels on these guys to get them up to a better kind of stat level where they could survive once they got revived. So this time around I decided to see if I could do it without Yuna and focus on the heavier hitters that naturally have higher HP and higher defense as well. So you can see me start to cash in some more sphere levels and make preparations once again. By the end of this, Waka had basically completed Kimari's little portion of the sphere grid, and I started moving him onto Tidus's one because that's where we started to put all of the extra strength spheres and that kind of thing, and it wasn't going to take long before he started to really benefit from those as well. So the first part of Tidus's grid is slow, but after the first, like, I would say 30 sphere levels or so, it really starts to pick up, and so he'd be getting much more powerful in the near future, especially if I took a little bit of time to grind as well, which I didn't at this point, but of course the potential is always there. So I got myself ready for another attempt, and this is one of the things that's kind of been happening a lot in this playthrough. At this point, I didn't realize that I'd gotten into an encounter in which we ended up getting a high potion. So the attempt started to play out, and Waka ended up using a high potion instead of an X, which really annoyed me. But that's what happened, and the attempt also failed anyway. And so I was like, I need to get rid of these high potions. So I wanted to get into an encounter, take some damage, and then basically use the high potions to get them out of my inventory. But then, of course, while I was kind of messing around with these encounters and just trying to gain a couple of extra sphere levels and get rid of the high potions instead of trying to find a merchant to sell them to, I actually ended up getting a really good weapon for Waka. And this was something I definitely wanted to make use of because he didn't really have like a quote-unquote ultimate weapon for this particular stage of the game. And so with 4 free slots to play with, I could end up adding like the piercing and the evading counter for him as well, to have like a fully fledged weapon for him to use for this particular stage of the game. So after all of this messing around, I finally settled on what I wanted to do to be able to win. The way I did it was to basically give Waka the Auto Potion and the Auto Phoenix together, because I felt like that combination would just be so strong, and I wanted to keep it for future use as well. So with Tidus, I cashed in some more sphere levels to make sure that he could definitely be revived and survive the counterattack. And I swapped out Yuna with Kimari because I wanted that third attacker to have enough power to actually do meaningful damage, because Spectral Keeper has 52,000 HP, which isn't like a huge amount. And so if Yuna could have gotten 3 attacks, let's say, then that would have been about 12 to 15,000 damage that Kimari would have done instead, which would have been a lot more useful to me. So I felt like that damage output was a better way to kind of approach the situation than to have Yuna with a second Auto Phoenix, but ultimately costing me a lot of damage and not helping with the damage output. So I set out with this trio, and I felt like at this stage with the X Potion, with Auto Phoenix, and with all 3 characters having enough HP to survive against a counterattack once they've been killed, I felt like these were the ingredients necessary to be able to win. Counterattack comes in, this should kill both of them, and it does. Let's see what Waka does here. He revives both, which is very crucial. So you saw in the attempt with Yuna and Tidus there, he used the potion on himself, and then he only revived one of the 2, which was pretty important in terms of how it can affect the battle. So Tidus with a clutch dodge here, this means that Waka only has 1 character to revive, which he can definitely do. And so this was starting to look like a much more well-oiled attempt, and things were syncing up pretty nicely. So Kimari surviving that attack obviously is what is needed, and Waka can just continue to heal back to full health and bring back the rest of the team. Now Glyph Mine falling on Waka here was really harsh, and it was kind of a race against time at this point to see if we could survive. So Kimari gets taken out. Waka thankfully survives long enough to revive him, but would he be around for long enough to kind of win the battle for us? Time would tell. So Tidus taken out, Waka still in the game, thankfully. The Glyph Mine hasn't gone off yet, and so he revives Tidus. Berserk Tail on Tidus, and he does get hit with the Berserk, so he's going to do big damage on his next one. But he is kind of synced up with Kimari now, so they will both get taken out if they get hit. And this timing is just horrible because Waka's no longer alive to revive them, and this means I've got 1 hit left basically. And that 1 hit was enough. If that didn't kill Spectral Keeper, it would have done the counterattack, and more than likely both Kimari and Tidus would have died. Now, if the Glyph Mine didn't hit Waka, that wouldn't have been a problem anyway, so it's kind of swings and roundabouts here, but you can see from the general strategy that we did have enough at this stage to be able to defeat Spectral Keeper, but it did require some genuinely beefy stats to be able to get through. So thankfully, despite the initial shock of being taken out so easily by those counterattacks, and wondering if I was going to have to put in a ton of work to be able to get through Spectral Keeper, it wasn't too horrible. I did need to do a little bit more grinding and get my characters up to a different kind of level, and the investment that I made in having enough Phoenix Downs for a second Auto Phoenix armor was also enough to win the day. So thankfully we got it done, and it was on to our showdown against the mighty Yunalesca, who is one of the biggest highlights of any playthrough in Final Fantasy X. So I am going to leave it here for this episode. There was a lot to do in this one. It covers actually quite a large span of time, and so the Gagazet area, Sanctuary Keeper, Zanakan Dome, and Spectral Keeper, that stuff did take quite some time, but it was an essential part of the run, and the growth that the characters experienced through there, and the extra armors and stuff that I got along the way through, say, the Behemoth and the Mega Phoenixes that I picked up, it did have quite a knock-on effect for what was to come as well. So I am going to wrap things up here. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you are continuing to enjoy the series. As always, a big thank you to everybody on Patreon and all of the new patrons that have joined as a result of this series as well. It's been immense. I really do appreciate all of the massive support for the series, and I hope we can continue to have these adventures together in the future. So I'll see you for the next episode. You will get to see how things went against Yunalesca, and if I can get over one of the biggest hurdles on the road to Braska's final Aeon. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you soon. Take care.